I was hooked to machines, fighting for my life. He was in our bed, fighting for pleasure with her. The flowers beside my tray were wilting. My marriage had already died. I didn't scream. I started collecting. Missed calls became timestamps. Perfume on his collar became evidence. By the time my fever broke, I had the footage. Our sheets, their laughter, their promises typed with the same hands that held mine. The company gala was 6 weeks away. 200 people, his CEO, his promotion. That was my clock. From the IV drip to the ballroom lights, I planned every step. He thought my illness made me weak. He never imagined what patience could build. My story didn't end in that bed. It began with what I did next. My name is Sarah, and 1 year ago I was dying. Not dramatically, not like in the movies. It was slow, confusing, and terrifying in the way only real illness can be. I still remember the morning it started, a dull ache in my abdomen that wouldn't go away, then the fever climbing higher and higher until I couldn't think straight. Marcus drove me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. I can still feel his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady, and how, even through the pain, I thought about how lucky I was to have him. Before all of this, our life had been ordinary in the best way. Tuesday nights we cooked together, Marcus chopping vegetables while I stirred pasta sauce, both of us talking about our days. Sunday mornings meant coffee in bed and crossword puzzles we never finished. Small moments that felt like forever. I thought we were building something. I thought we were safe. The doctors found a severe infection. My appendix had ruptured days before my knowing, and poison had spread through my body. They rushed me into surgery. When I woke up, Marcus was there, his eyes red-rimmed, holding my hand. He told me I had scared him. I squeezed his fingers weakly and promised I wasn't going anywhere. He smiled, but behind that smile, I would later learn, a shadow was already forming. The recovery was supposed to take 2 weeks in the hospital, then 6 weeks at home. I was 32 years old, and suddenly I couldn't walk to the bathroom without help. I couldn't shower alone. I couldn't lift anything heavier than a water bottle. The IV pump beside my bed clicked and whirred in steady rhythm, counting the minutes I spent healing while my marriage quietly died. The hospital became my entire world. White walls, fluorescent lights that hummed even at night, the antiseptic smell that clung to everything, mixing with the scent of wilting flowers people brought and forgot to replace. Late nights were the worst. The hospital grew quiet, except for distant machines and footsteps in the hallway. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them, losing count, starting over. Sometimes I scrolled through old text messages from Marcus on my phone, sweet messages from months ago, years ago, telling me he couldn't wait to see me that night, that he was my favorite person, that he loved me more than anything. I read them over and over, trying to remember what it felt like when those words were true, trying to convince myself they still were. Marcus worked as a sales director at a tech company, an important job, long hours. I understood when he couldn't visit every day. I understood when he came late, looking exhausted. I understood because I loved him, because we'd been married for 7 years, because I trusted him with every fragile piece of my recovering body and broken spirit. My best friend, Rachel, visited more than anyone. She brought magazines, smuggled in real coffee, and sat with me during the endless afternoon hours when the hospital felt like a prison. One day, on her 5th visit, she wanted to know where Marcus was. Her voice was careful, almost neutral. I told her he was working, that he had a big client presentation. She nodded, but something flickered across her face, something I was too medicated, too tired, too trusting to notice.
That afternoon, alone again, I found myself opening our text thread, typing out messages I wouldn't send. I missed him. It was lonely there. I asked him silently to come soon. Then I deleted them all. He was working. He was busy. I was being needy, weak. Everything I had promised myself I would never be. I thought I was healing. I thought my husband was working. I thought my life was waiting for me at home, patient and unchanged. I was wrong. About everything. By the 7th day in the hospital, the nurses had started acting strangely. At first, it was small things, awkward silences whenever I mentioned Marcus, pitying glances when I asked if my husband had called. One evening, Diane, an older nurse, sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. She asked softly if everything at home was really okay. I said of course it was, though I didn't understand why she was asking. She hesitated, squeezed my hand, and told me to just focus on getting better. That comment haunted me through the night. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on her face, as if she knew something terrible and couldn't bring herself to say it. Around 3 in the morning, I started crying, not from pain, but from a fear I couldn't even name. Diane came in to check my vitals and found me with tears running down my face. She didn't speak. She just pulled a chair close and held my hand the way my mother had when I was little and scared of the dark. She told me nothing was wrong, that I was just healing and should focus on that. But her eyes told a different story. They said she was sorry for something I hadn't discovered yet. Marcus came the next morning with flowers, yellow roses, my favorite, but the petals were already browning and the stems bent. He kissed my forehead and said he missed me. He told me work was crazy. The Johnson account was killing him. I whispered that I missed him too, that I missed home. He promised it would be soon. The doctor had said maybe another week, and then I'd be back where I belonged. Those words felt warm and safe. I held on to them like a lifeline. That afternoon, Rachel arrived, looking shaken. She closed the door and said we needed to talk. My heart dropped. I asked what was wrong, if it was my mother or the kids. We didn't have children yet. We'd been trying for 2 years, but my body hadn't cooperated. Another failure I'd learned to carry quietly. Rachel said it wasn't my family. She pulled her chair close, so close our knees touched, and told me she didn't know how to say it. I told her to just say it. She took a breath that seemed to hurt and told me she'd seen Marcus yesterday at the Meridian, that expensive restaurant downtown. I said slowly that he'd mentioned a client dinner. She told me he hadn't been with a client, he'd been with Jenna. The world tilted sideways. Jenna, my coworker, the 26-year-old marketing assistant at the advertising firm where I'd worked before getting sick, the one who laughed too loud at Marcus's jokes at company parties. The one with perfect hair and a body that had never failed her, never betrayed her, never left her weak and broken in a hospital bed.
I heard myself trying to rationalize it, wondering aloud if it might have been work-related. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She told me Marcus had been holding Jenna's hand across the table, looking at her the way he used to look at me. The machines beside my bed beeped steadily, monitoring my heart rate, my oxygen, my blood pressure, everything inside me being measured, displayed, proven to be failing, even as I tried to hold myself together. I asked if she was sure. She said she was. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip out my IV and run home, burst through our front door and demand the truth, but I couldn't. I could barely sit up without feeling dizzy. My body was still healing from trying not to die, and my husband was holding another woman's hand at a restaurant we couldn't afford. Or rather, that I couldn't afford. Apparently he could. For her. Rachel whispered there was more. She didn't want to tell me, but I needed to know. She'd asked around carefully. People had seen them together for weeks, since before I got sick. The betrayal multiplied, spreading through me like the infection that had nearly killed me. Weeks before I got sick. Which meant while I was healthy, working, coming home to him every night, cooking his favorite meals, laughing at his jokes, planning our future. He was planning his future with her. I thought I knew the worst of it, but the real wound hadn't been cut yet. That night, I did something I had never done before. I asked Diane, the nurse who had tried to warn me, if I could borrow her phone. I lied that mine had died, that I needed to make a call. She handed it over without question, her eyes knowing and sad. I called our home number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. My own voice, bright and happy from years ago, invited the caller to leave a message. I called Marcus's cell. No answer. Then I did something that made my hands shake. I opened a web browser and logged into our cell phone account. We shared a plan, and I had always had access to the billing. I had just never had a reason to look. Until now. The call logs told me everything. Hours of calls to a number I didn't recognize. Dozens of texts sent at all hours. Late nights when he'd told me he was working, early mornings when he'd said he had meetings, afternoons when I'd been lying in the hospital room, trusting him, loving him, waiting for him. I traced the number. It was Jenna's. My body was healing. My heart was breaking. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and the shock and the humiliation, something else was growing. Something cold and sharp and patient. I handed the phone back to Diane. She studied my face and asked if I'd found what I was looking for. I told her I had. She said she was sorry. I told her not to be. And for the first time in days, I smiled. Because I wasn't. They released me from the hospital on the 14th day. Marcus came to pick me up with flowers and apologies, saying he was sorry he hadn't been able to be there more. Work had been insane, he said, but now he could finally take care of me properly. He helped me into the car with gentle hands, the picture of devotion. I let him help me. I let him fuss over me. I smiled when he smiled, and I said nothing about what I knew. Because by then, I had spent the last week planning, thinking, calculating. And revenge, I'd learned, requires patience. Our house looked exactly as I'd left it. Clean, organized, The bed made with fresh sheets. The flowers on the kitchen table were new. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Since I couldn't climb stairs easily yet, Marcus had set up the guest room downstairs for me, at least until I was stronger, he'd said, because he didn't want me hurting myself. How considerate. How caring. How convenient that I wouldn't be sleeping in our bedroom, the one he could now continue using for his other life without me discovering the truth. Rachel came over that first afternoon. Marcus had gone back to work. Another urgent client meeting, he'd said, before kissing my forehead like I was a child or a pet. Rachel sat beside me on the couch and asked quietly what I was going to do. I told her I was going to do everything. She blinked, confused. I turned to her, and whatever she saw in my face made her lean back slightly. I said I was going to destroy them both. Completely, publicly, permanently. But not yet. First, I needed to get stronger. First, I needed evidence. First, I needed them to feel safe enough to make mistakes. I told her how he'd sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand while I cried because I was scared I might die. How he'd told me he loved me, that we'd get through it together, and how, the whole time, he'd been texting her, planning dinners with her, choosing her over me while I was fighting to survive. Tears filled Rachel's eyes. She told me she was sorry. I told her I wasn't. Not anymore. Because now I was going to show him exactly what he had destroyed and make sure everyone knew what he had done. That night, the mask finally fell. But what followed was even darker. I pretended to sleep when Marcus came home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. I pretended not to notice when he texted constantly during dinner, his phone face down on the table, as if that somehow hid the truth. I pretended to believe him when he said he'd be working from the office that weekend, even though his company had switched to remote months ago. I pretended. And while I pretended, I documented everything. Rachel became my quiet accomplice. She followed them twice, took photos at hotels, restaurants, even the park where Marcus and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. Each image was time-stamped, geotagged, undeniable. Then I hired a private investigator, using money from my personal savings account, one Marcus didn't know existed. The investigator was a woman named Margaret, in her 50s, who had seen 1,000 cheating husbands and didn't judge me for wanting proof. During our first meeting, held at a coffee shop while Marcus thought I was at physical therapy, she asked if I was sure I wanted to do this. I told her I'd never been more certain of anything. She warned that it would hurt, seeing everything confirmed, seeing every detail. I told her, good. I wanted it to hurt now. While I could still use the pain. While I could still turn it into something. She nodded slowly and said it was time to burn his life down. Within 2 weeks, Margaret had everything. Hotel receipts charged to Marcus's secret credit card, photos of them kissing in his car, text messages recovered from phone records, each one more damning than the last. The one that haunted me most was from 3 weeks into my hospital stay. Marcus had written that he hated lying but couldn't wait to see her, that I was getting discharged soon. Jenna had replied, asking if it was time to finally tell me so they could be together for real. Marcus had responded, promising soon, telling her to let him handle it his way, that I was still weak, that he needed to time it right. Time it right. Like my shattered heart was a meeting he could schedule. Like my pain was a project he could manage. The evidence came in pieces, but Margaret compiled it all into one perfect dossier. Photos with timestamps, GPS data, credit card statements. A timeline so complete, so undeniable, that looking at it felt like watching my marriage dissolve frame by frame. During one of our meetings, she asked whether I wanted to punish him or free myself. I looked up from the photographs scattered across the table and asked what the difference was. She said punishment was about making him hurt. Freedom was about making sure I never felt powerless again. Sometimes, she said, they were the same thing. Sometimes they weren't. I told her I wanted both. She nodded once and said, "Then we'll make sure you get both." Later that night, alone in the guest room, I stared at an image of Marcus and Jenna in our bed. The bed where we'd talked about starting a family, where we'd comforted each other through bad days, where we'd promised forever. Something inside me cracked. Not my resolve, but the last fragile piece of the woman who had believed in him. At midnight, I called Rachel. My voice was shaking as I told her I didn't think I could go through with it, that I had all this evidence and didn't know if I was strong enough to face it. She asked where I was. I told her I was in the guest room, that he was upstairs, probably texting her right now. She said she was coming over. I told her it was midnight. She said she didn't care.
20 minutes later, she was in my driveway. We sat in my car, the engine off, the night pressing close around us. I showed her everything. The photos, the messages, the timeline of lies. She whispered my name and told me she was sorry. I told her maybe I should just leave quietly, get a lawyer, file for divorce, move on. Why did it have to be public? Why did I have to humiliate him? Rachel took my hands and told me it was because he'd humiliated me. Because he'd taken my trust while I was fighting to survive and turned it into a joke. Because if I didn't do this, he'd rewrite the story, say my illness made me paranoid, that he was the victim, that I was unstable. And I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if I had been strong enough to fight back. I asked her, what if I wasn't strong enough? She told me I was. That I'd survived sepsis, that I'd survived betrayal, that I could survive telling the truth. I looked at our house through the windshield, the home we'd chosen, painted, filled with memories I'd thought were real. I said, okay, I would do it. Rachel squeezed my hands and promised she'd help me every step of the way, that I wasn't alone. That promise carried me through the next 3 weeks. Because private humiliation, I realized, wasn't enough. He had humiliated me publicly, taking Jenna to restaurants where our friends might see them, risking my reputation at the company where we'd both worked, treating our marriage like something disposable and secret. So his reckoning would be public too. I just needed the perfect stage. And Marcus, as predictable as always, was about to give it to me. The company's anniversary gala was 6 weeks away. It was always a spectacle. 200 employees, spouses, clients, and executives gathered under chandeliers and champagne light at the Grand View Hotel. Black tie, open bar, the kind of night where careers were made and reputations cemented. Marcus had been angling for a VP position for 2 years, and this was his chance to prove himself, to show he was leadership material, stable, trustworthy, a man of integrity, loyalty, and honor. I marked the date on my calendar and smiled. The next 6 weeks became the performance of a lifetime. I played the role of the recovering wife to perfection. Weak enough to need him, strong enough not to be a burden.
I thanked him for his patience. I apologized for being sick, for disrupting our lives, for not being the wife he deserved. That last part was true, though not in the way he thought. He didn't deserve any wife, least of all me. As I grew stronger, he grew careless. Jenna began visiting our house when she thought I was asleep or out. But I had installed cameras. Small, hidden, silent witnesses suggested by the investigator. The soft click of the record button felt like loading a weapon. Later, I would sit alone and watch the footage. Them on our couch. Them in our bed. Them laughing about me. He had said I was clingy now, always needing help with something. She had called him a good husband for staying with me through it all. And he had promised her it wouldn't be much longer, that once the gala was over and he got the promotion, he'd have the financial security to leave. His lawyer had told me I wouldn't get much since I hadn't been working. They were wrong about that, too. I'd been freelancing quietly from home, rebuilding my savings, preparing for war. But I let them believe I was helpless, dependent, trapped. Then, 3 weeks before the gala, everything almost fell apart. I was reviewing footage on my laptop when the front door opened. Marcus was home early. I had 10 seconds, maybe less, before he reached the living room. I slammed the laptop shut just as he rounded the corner. He asked casually what I was working on. My heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it. I told him it was just emails, boring work stuff. He looked at me for a long moment, then shrugged and asked if I wanted to order takeout. I said sure, my voice somehow calm despite the adrenaline flooding my body. That night, I moved everything to an encrypted cloud drive and wiped every local file. The flash drive I held afterward felt cold as a coin, heavy as judgment. That little piece of metal could destroy everything he'd built. All I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to use it. 3 days before the gala, I went back to work. Linda, my boss, hugged me tightly when she saw me and said she'd missed me. She asked if I was sure I was ready. I told her I was more than ready. And I meant it. My body was healed, my mind sharp, my purpose crystal clear. I sat at my old desk working as though nothing had happened. People stopped by to welcome me back. Jenna avoided me completely, which was fine. We'd see each other soon enough. That night, Marcus asked about my day. I told him it had been good, stirring pasta sauce that smelled like garlic and revenge. I mentioned that Linda had offered me a project manager position. More responsibility, better pay, full-time starting next week. He froze mid-bite, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, and said, "That was great, really great." But the smile didn't reach his eyes. This wasn't part of his plan. A wife with her own income and strength was harder to control, harder to leave behind. I told him we should celebrate at the gala, that I'd already RSVP'd for both of us. He asked if I was sure I wanted to go, that it would be a long night. I told him I wouldn't miss it for the world, that after everything we'd been through, I wanted to be there to celebrate his success. He swallowed hard and said, that would be nice. Such a small word for what I had planned. The night before the gala, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I had practiced my speech 100 times, memorized every word, planned every pause. But looking at my reflection, at the woman I had become through pain and betrayal, I realized something. This wasn't about Marcus anymore. It wasn't even about Jenna. It was about the woman staring back at me, about whether she would allow herself to disappear or stand up and be seen. I chose to be seen. Rachel came over that evening to help me prepare the email to the CEO and HR.
We sat at my kitchen table with 2 laptops, reading the letter aloud, double-checking attachments, perfecting every word. She looked at me, her finger hovering over the send button, and said, "This was really happening." My pulse jumped. For a fleeting second, I remembered Marcus's face as it used to be, the way he looked at me when life was simple and I still believed him. What if this made me the villain? I looked into my own reflection in the dark screen. My heartbeat steadied. Truth isn't cruelty. Justice isn't madness. I told her to send it. We hit send at exactly 9 p.m. on a Friday night, late enough that the emails would sit in inboxes all weekend, impossible to ignore by Monday morning, but they'd be read before the gala. I had made sure of that. The subject line was simple: urgent, ethics violation requiring immediate review. Rachel asked what came next. I told her we got ready for tomorrow night and watched his world fall apart. The night of the gala was clear and cold. I dressed deliberately, a deep red gown that hugged the body I had fought to reclaim. My hair swept up, makeup perfect. I looked like myself again. Strong, beautiful, alive. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She was sharper now, steadier, entirely her own. Marcus appeared behind me, adjusting his bow tie. He told me I looked amazing. I thanked him and said I wanted to look my best, that tonight was important. We arrived at the Grand View at 7 p.m. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter. The scent of perfume and ambition filled the air. Silk, champagne, and secrets about to surface. Colleagues greeted us warmly, happy to see me recovered, eager to ask Marcus about his promotion chances. I smiled, nodded, and played the part of the supportive wife one last time. Jenna was there, of course, black dress, high heels clicking across the marble floor. When she saw me, she went pale. I smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made her even more nervous. She stammered that it was good to see me and that she was glad I was better. I told her I was grateful to be there, that life was precious, that one never knew what might happen, or who might betray whom. Her eyes widened. Marcus coughed. She excused herself and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus muttered that I'd been a little intense. I tilted my head and told him I thought I'd been nice. At 8, the awards ceremony began. Marcus was nominated for the VP role, along with 2 others. He kept checking his phone, probably texting Jenna to stay away, probably panicking. Good. The CEO, Richard Hammond, took the stage. A man in his 60s, proud of his company and its old-fashioned values: family, integrity, trust. He began speaking about how success wasn't just measured in profits or productivity, but in the character of the people behind it. Leadership, he said, wasn't about results. It was about who you were when no one was watching. I reached into my purse. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. Then Richard Hammond said he was disappointed to share what he had learned that week. Marcus frowned, confused, and I stood up. Every head turned toward me. 200 people. The chandeliers reflecting light, sharp as glass. I told them I was sorry to interrupt, but that I had something to say. My voice carried through the silence like a blade through silk. Richard Hammond acknowledged me from the stage and invited me to speak. He already knew what was coming. 3 days earlier, I had sent him everything: photos, receipts, text logs, along with a detailed letter explaining that his VP candidate was conducting an affair with a junior employee using company time and resources, creating a hostile work environment, and lying to everyone who trusted him. I had copied HR, the board, and 6 senior executives. Thorough felt like the bare minimum. Marcus rose, color draining from his face, demanding to know what I was doing. I told him I was telling the truth and walked to the stage, heels sharp on marble.
The microphone was warm in my hand. I could hear the soft pop of my breath and knew the moment was real. I looked over the room. Marcus stranded at our table, Jenna attempting to hide behind a column, the colleagues who had visited me in the hospital and called me lucky for having a devoted husband. I introduced myself and laid out the facts. 2 months earlier, I had nearly died from a ruptured appendix, spent 2 weeks in the hospital and 6 more recovering at home. During that time, Marcus offered comfort, held my hand, promised partnership. Then I said what he had withheld, that he had been having an affair with Jenna Martinez, a marketing assistant at the company, that it began before I was ill, that they met at hotels while I was hooked to an IV, that they used our bed while I was at physical therapy, that they planned a future together while I fought to survive. The room rippled with shock. Marcus tried to discredit me, implying I was unwell. I cut him off and stated that I was perfectly well and documented. Medical records, hotel receipts, text logs from our shared phone plan, time-stamped, geotagged photos, a complete timeline demonstrating misuse of company resources and policy violations. I held up the flash drive, cold and decisive, and explained that copies were already with HR and the board. I wanted the room to know exactly who he was. Not a devoted husband or a leader, but a man who chose pleasure over his wife's survival. His mask finally broke. He lashed out, framing it as a mistake and suggesting my illness excused him. The ballroom went silent. Even Jenna recoiled. I reminded him that marriage meant love in sickness and in health. Security intercepted him when he lunged toward the stage, and the CEO announced immediate suspensions for both Marcus Chen and Jenna Martinez, pending a full HR and ethics investigation, with security escort and formal next steps to follow within 48 hours. The CEO offered sympathy. I told him I didn't need comfort, only a beginning. I left the stage with my head high. At the entrance, Rachel met me in tears and held me so tightly I could barely breathe. The laughter that rose in me afterward was not hysteria, it was relief, made audible. 3 months later, the divorce. Marcus attempted to fight, claiming I had unfairly damaged his reputation. His lawyer withdrew after reviewing the evidence presented in court. Every receipt, every photo, every time-stamped message. The company's investigation corroborated everything. Both terminations stood. Word traveled across the industry. The consequences would linger for years. I felt no guilt, only freedom. The morning after the divorce was finalized, I woke in my new apartment to perfect quiet. No footsteps overhead, no phone vibrating with lies. Just sunlight sliding across a bed that belonged only to me. I made coffee slowly and watched the city come alive. For the first time in a year, there was nowhere I needed to be and no performance I needed to give. Only peace. Work became refuge, not battleground. I earned the promotion. I traveled to Morocco, Iceland, Tokyo, places Marcus had never wanted to see. I built a life that fit me, rediscovering who Sarah was when she wasn't accommodating or plotting. About a year after the gala, I met Rachel for wine at the coffee shop where I had hired Margaret. She asked if I had any regrets. I considered it honestly and decided I did not. Marcus had made his choices while I was trying to survive. I had ensured there were consequences. She toasted my strength. I toasted to truth. 6 months later, I saw Marcus by chance in a coffee shop. Our eyes met, and I waited for anger or pain or even satisfaction. Nothing came. He looked older, diminished. We exchanged names like strangers, and I walked past him and out the door without looking back. That night in the mirror, I recognized a woman Marcus had never known. Not the wife he married, not even the Avenger from the gala, but someone new, tempered by pain, sharpened into steel. On the windowsill, a small vase of deep red roses glowed in the morning light. They were fresh and thriving. So was I. Sometimes I still think about the hospital. The antiseptic air, The steady beeping, the hand he held while he lied. But the memory no longer hurts. It marks a turning point. The moment I learned what I am capable of, the moment I understood that physical weakness is not powerlessness. He mistook my hospital bed for weakness. He believed illness made me discardable. He was wrong. The bed taught me patience, to watch, to wait, to plan. Survival itself is power. Choosing myself, completely and without apology, is the strongest choice I have ever made. I don't spend my life thinking about him. I'm busy living the life he thought was gone. Busy being happy. Busy being free. The best revenge is not destruction. It's building a life so genuine and full that the person who hurt you fades into a closed chapter, a lesson that revealed your worth. Marcus is that chapter. When memory reminds me of what I survived, I see the woman I became because of it. Stronger, wiser, fiercer, certain of her value. He didn't break me. He cracked me open so the light could get in, so I could see clearly, so I could choose myself. And I do, every day. He expected I would never recover. I didn't just recover. I became better. Someone who knows her worth. That truth will follow him forever. I am thriving. I am free. Discarding me while I fought to live was the greatest mistake of his life. Whether it haunts him is irrelevant. I don't care. He misread the hospital bed as weakness. It was my apprenticeship in patience. Patience taught me how to choose myself. If this opens something in you, if you were betrayed when you needed love most, if you felt broken and found strength you didn't know you had, leave a piece of your truth below. We read every confession. Your story matters.